say your view of God has changed since you were a child?
Drastically. Like it was an obligation to try to have a connection and relationship with God as a child because my mom said so. But then it became, do I even want a relationship with something like this? Like the more I kept thinking about both the actions of said God, its people, and then all the potential implications of those actions, it's always been like, yeah, no, the more I think about it, the more somebody like that is antithetical to everything that I am as a human. Like, I don't like seeing anybody suffer unnecessarily, yet this guy kind of, I wouldn't say he always delights in it, but he's quite quick to pull the trigger.
Okay. And so, peeling back the layers, what did the journey into Satanism look like?
That is like, it started off as, oh, this is cool and edgy. What's this all about? Then it was like, oh, this isn't just cool and edgy. It's kind of just about owning your bullshit, being better, and being true to yourself in every way you can. To which, let's be real, that's something that everybody should strive for. Be kind, do no harm to others, like love everybody as much as you can, love yourself ultimately. Just be better and help your community.
What would you say motivated you to get serious about it in your teen years?
Mostly, my brother. My brother was baptized before I was. I was never baptized. So any activities like Jehovah Witnesses are famous for the door-to-door stuff. It was mostly a time for my family to be outside, and we would do that ministry stuff. Also, people within the congregation, they were very nice. So what motivated me to get more serious was just to be with them more often.
What led to the decision for you to stop going?
Mostly, I would say my parents also stopped their attendance. So most of the time I would go because they would go. And when I would go alone or with somebody else, I would feel a little bit out of place. So now that most of my family members have stopped going, I just lost interest.
And so digging into that a little bit, especially the piece on like your parents no longer going to the hall, I know when it comes to the JW faith, you have the things like being in the field and like being in ministry. So when you all stopped going to the hall, did it change the other ways in which people show up? Did people stop going into ministry, or was it just kind of a stepping back from the hall?
At first, it was the ministry. We weren't going out knocking on doors as much or writing letters to people. We were assigned Bible studies to do. I was assigned to do Bible studies with people younger my age. We stepped away from that, and then eventually we just stopped going to the hall altogether.
And would you say, since taking a step back from the hall or even like showing less interest in the hall, would you say do you feel as if your overall beliefs or view of God have changed over time, or would you say they're about the same?
I feel like they have definitely changed. I definitely see God as less rigid, as the hall has taught us. Uh, I think through my personal introspective kind of thoughts of God definitely has changed, because there are certain rules within the congregation that God believes in this, that, and that, and we cannot deviate from that. But now I feel like um, it's a more wider belief system for me.
Mm-hmm. What would you say like that unpacking process was like for you? Because I feel like for me, I didn't grow up JW, but I grew up in a household where the church was pretty strict and rigid in terms of like their standards, right? So in terms of conduct, in terms of like how you dress, in terms of like also like in my church we had like the weekly service, but you also had like committees that people can join, other things that you would be able to do like throughout the week. And so I definitely resonate and feel you when you just kind of talk about like just viewing God as less rigid, because that's something that I genuinely had to really work through and unpack, to view God in like this new way that I haven't viewed God in like all of my years. So what would you say that unpacking process was like for you?
At first, if I'm being honest, I was angry. You can my brother can definitely attest when like I said, he was first baptized. So eventually, when I started thinking God differently, I would constantly try to challenge him in his faith, which I do regret. Um, eventually, I was on the path to becoming an atheist. I didn't want to believe in God anymore, and then eventually, um, as I began to maybe think of God in a different light, more accepting to me, uh, I've been more comfortable in calling myself a Christian.
What kept you from necessarily becoming an atheist?
For me, I have this idea that if you believe in certain things, you cannot like call yourself a Christian. For example, for me, I was really into biology, so evolution was a thing that was a big no-no in the church. So I thought if I believe in evolution, there's no way I can be a Christian until my professor he expressed that he himself was a Catholic and he was an evolutionary professor. He was a devout Catholic. So I felt there was if someone like him can call himself a Catholic while doing something that is, you know, non-Christian, I feel like how do I say it? There's more leeway to be given.
When I think about your deconstruction journey, I feel like on one level it was like deconstructing from like the religion, kind of taking a step back from the church, but there's also this loss of community that you're then navigating, right? And just a lot of because even I would agree, growing up in church, I'm like religion, spirituality, even all of that aside, these are people that I've spent a lot of time with that I've grown up with, right? And to your point, growing up predominantly like in a church, especially being homeschooled, this has shaped a large part of your being, right? Absolutely. So not only are you like deconstructing just kind of like on the religious side, but there's also like a deconstructing of just you as a person, right? Because this is such a strong foundation of like what your upbringing was like, right? So reflecting on your deconstruction journey, thinking about how you unpacked and just like deconstructed these religious like beliefs, what did that process look like for you, especially understand how intertwined it was with your overall personal identity, if that makes sense?
Doing some real journalism here. That's a hard hitting ass question. Um,
No, I'm getting scared.
I guess the first phase of that deconstruction was when I was still in the church. Family's still very much a part of all the church activities. Again, growing up in church, being homeschooled, like we were a part of all the church extracurriculars. I was in the youth choir. I was in the youth ministry. Our church had what they called the master's program, where they would take like some of the youth and like try to develop them for career building, all that kind of stuff. And so the first part of deconstructing that was as my religious journey started to clash with the doctrine, the dogma of church leadership. It was beginning to discover, okay, who am I and what is my relationship to this religion outside of them, which is it's hard growing up in church to distance yourself from church leadership because like that's how the church operates. It funnels the identity of all of the parishioners into the leadership. Makes you kind of have to function in lockstep with your pastor, your deacons, your bishops, all of that. And that I fought with church leadership quite a bit. It was growing up like in the 20 teens. I would like the church would be like the pastor would have a sermon on Sunday, and me and my family would occasionally go to more than one of these Sunday morning services. So like I would sit through one service, and then through the next service I would be posting on Facebook or on a blog, refuting from a biblical standpoint the things that the preacher was saying in the first service, and that got me in trouble a couple times. That was fun. I would right. Me and Terrence were both involved in the media department at our church, so occasionally we would help run the live streams of the services. I got pulled off of a service live stream when I was just switching between cameras, making sure the service looked good for the online audience. But I got pulled off because as I was doing that, I was also posting on Facebook, yeah, here's where the sermon is wrong, this is incorrect, this is what the Bible actually says. It looked a lot like I kind of entrenched myself more deeply into the Bible in opposition to church leadership. Which you think on its own would be like, okay, now this guy's like a super deep believer in the Bible. But no, the questions didn't stop. So the next step after kind of getting run out of the church along with my family was to deconstruct my relationship with the Bible, now with church leadership, the church out of the question. That involved going to another church with my family and we didn't get kicked out of this one, but we left before I got us kicked out of that one. So the end result of that was me kind of reaching the conclusion that I had no reason by myself to believe any of it. Like looking back and engaging with all the critical thinking that I'd been taught as like training to be a Christian apologist. I kind of took it out. I took a third person view outside of that and realized, okay, I don't need to be Christian because all of the reasons that I've had to be Christian my whole life have kind of hinged on the idea that the Bible is just fundamentally true. Like there's no proof outside of that, even as I'm here trying to like argue and learn proofs to engage others and convert others. So learning to convert others, I deconverted myself.
How would you say your view of God has changed since you were a child?
I would say I went from like without question believing in his existence to feeling like there's definitely a part of me that still believes that there's a possibility that he exists, but I can't fully say if there's like a genuine belief there or if I'm just thinking that because I was raised into it kind of thing, where like there's just that that formative part of me that never fully let go of it. So maybe there's always just going to be that part of me that feels like there's something there. But for the most part, I lean more towards probably not, just because I feel like there are a lot of things just written in the Bible itself that are contradictory of what we know to exist. There could be just information that was omitted that hasn't been made public that maybe does confirm things that we do know. One of the main things that I refer to is just like, there's never any mention of dinosaurs. I've always thought that was weird to me. I mean, there probably are dinosaurs in the Bible, but just like the whole timeline of like people existing biblically, it kind of jumps straight to people existing in Jerusalem, but we definitely have like fossil records of people existing for like tens of thousands of years before we really even developed language, but there were definitely people. And then like dozens of civilizations prior to the ones existing in Jerusalem as well that had their own religions and beliefs and languages, and it doesn't seem to have any mention of that in the Bible. I'm not sure because I've never read it, of course, but from what I do know, there's just a lot of information that we know for sure is real but isn't mentioned in the Bible. So that's to me is what kind of leads me to lean towards their more than likely not really being a god, and more of just kind of my general feeling about religion in general is sort of how mythology has been for people in the past, like Greek and Norse mythology. It's essentially just the way that we as humans explain how we exist in the universe before we made the technological advances that we did to have a better understanding, or to have the better understanding that we do. It's essentially just modern mythology, in my opinion.
This is a bit of a side note, but you bringing up dinosaurs make me think about this because, like, growing up in church, they told us that dinosaurs were killed in the flood with Noah.
All right, I'll concede that they acknowledged the dinosaurs. I'll concede that.
So like when you it like that just like tickles me because like to your point, like that is something that like that doesn't make sense. And I feel like to me, I feel like my journey, even though it started a lot later, it was just like a lot of those things where it's like this shit just doesn't make sense, or even shit that just high key just seemed very cruel. Like, okay, and this is really just like me talking, but like the whole dinosaur thing kind of make this thought pop into my head. But even like when it comes to one of the stories that I really grapple with is like the story of Job, right? Where it's like you have this character that did everything right, and then like in this pissing contest between Satan and God, where like this whole, oh, this is a loyal subject, oh, of course he is, you gave him everything, and then like this whole like ruining of Job's life to prove a point, where I'm like, that's high-key kind of fucked up. Where I'm like, as a god, right, I create these people, like, you follow me, whatever, and I'm not even saying that I don't believe in God, but it was just like one of those things where it's like, you sat here, you didn't kill the man's family, you then covered him from boils from like his head to his toe. And like we read these in church, and it's like it's such a great story of faith. And look at Job, look at how he didn't curse God. And like also I would high key be upset if you murked my family, if you like just I am covered in boils for the sake of like proving a point. Like that is infuriating. But yes, my church told me that the dinosaurs died when the earth was flooded. And so another question, this ties back into something you said, and I believe you mentioned that at some point in your adult life you would be potentially open to going back and picking the Bible back up.
Yeah.
And so just kind of thinking about like potentially reconnecting there, if it is something that you get back into, will it be the Bible specifically? Will it be given Christianity, just peeking into that? Have you ever thought about potentially reading into other religions or spiritual beliefs?
That's actually a really good question, because I was wondering about that myself, like not too long ago, where I was really thinking about the fact that because I was raised in a Christian household, I just kind of defaulted to only really diving into that. And it never really occurred to me to consider the other faiths until very recently, where I think just out of genuine curiosity, I do find that I'm probably not going to be swayed one way or another to any of the denominations of any religion, but I am genuinely, just for my own curiosity, I was actually considering looking into like the Jewish and Islamic faith and just other denominations of Christianity as well, just to kind of get an idea and a better understanding of like what's going on with everybody, and really get a feel for, I guess, just kind of where everybody is, and personally see what the commonalities are between everything, because you definitely see this in pretty much anything that humans create. There are always very common themes across pretty much everything that anybody has ever come up with, and it was just going to be interesting for me to kind of dig into that and see, like, kind of try to piece together for myself where the origins of, like, you know, treating one another as you would like to be treated kind of thing, or you know, not committing violence against others, things like that, where kind of what the origins of that were. My personal theory is that, you know, humans being social creatures, we just kind of had to figure out rules for existing with one another without killing each other. So this was sort of like an easy sort of moral guideline to work with, rather than, you know, hard set rules. It's easier to attribute it to some sort of higher power that nobody has any control over, rather than just having personal responsibility for your own actions.
How would you say your view of God has changed since you were a child?
As a child, I used to look at God as my father figure, because a lot of people didn't know my story. And it was like, well, you know, you don't have a guy, you know, a father or a male in the household, so God could be that person if you lean on them. And I feel like, you know, it's a little messed up to tell the child that, especially when they don't necessarily know what type of household that they're growing up in. When my perspective and my view of God changed, it changed into more of like, instead of God being a person and trying to fulfill one certain role, God changed into like an experience. So once I started to like realize that, like, oh, I'm really truthfully experiencing God when I'm with the people who care about me, when I'm in my safe space, when I feel comfortable. That was, you know, me having those moments of bliss.
Absolutely. And I love that. And I feel like for me, when I first had that moment of like, oh, I experienced God outside of the walls of church, was really during the COVID-19 pandemic, right?
Yes.
Because now churches are shut down and you don't have that. But you literally cannot go to like churches were shut down, right?
Yes.
And that was really the first time where I really had to sit with okay, for so long, my relationship with God was heavily centered in this church, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where we read, that's where we prayed. And outside of that, it just felt very transactional, whereas like I would pray to God when I needed something, or I'd pray to God when I'm troubled. And so when COVID happened and shut the world down, now it's I have to reevaluate my relationship with God outside of this church. And I love the idea of God being experienced, and it reminds me of what you said earlier on God is love, because God just isn't in the church. God is with how I interact with people. It's how I treat people. It's how I show up in my work. It's how I show up in my friendships. Like God isn't just, okay, we kick it once a week or we kick it at Bible study. It's like, it's an experience.
Yeah. And, you know, to even dive a little further into that, you know, the scripture says, you know, greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. And God is in you.
You better.
God is in you. And you have to remember that God is in you, because A lot of people used to think I'm crazy. I was crazy because I used to talk to myself, and I'm like, I'm not talking to myself. I'm having a conversation with God.
Period.
And like that's when I do some of my best thinking. That's when I get some of the best ideas. Like,
Absolutely.
and it's so crazy. Like, people be like manifesting is like witchcraft and this, that, and the third. But when I'm manifesting and having these conversations, it's so crazy because like I'll like something to be in my heart. I'll desire something, and literally not even a week will pass, and like it'll come to fruition. And I'm just like, good God, like
God be loud.
He be real loud.
God be loud.
He be real. You get the power of the tongue.
Man.
You got to be careful with that
Man.
tongue.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it is wild because I had one of those experiences the other day, and I was praying to God. I was like, I was having a very hard time making a decision. I was like, I don't know if this is something that serves me. I don't know if this is something I walked away. And I be talking to God just straight up like we homies. I'm like,
Yeah.
I need you to send me a very clear-cut sign on what I should do. When I tell you the next day I had my answer, and it happened in a way that genuinely almost scared the fuck out of me.
And you knew it's a sign.
You
Like this
knew
is
it.
he's like, this the sign. It's a brick wall. You
Right?
just ran right into a brick wall.
God was like, you want a crystal clear answer? Say no
Say
more.
less.
Say no more. And God showed up. And I love how you quote scripture. And I say I love it because oftentimes when people start questioning or when people deconstruct, people are like, oh, you just haven't read enough. Or, oh, you don't know your Bible enough. Or, oh, you need to go to church. Well, people don't understand. Growing up in the church, we know this Bible better than a lot of the adults growing up in church. We read it already. We
It's ingrained
spent
in us.
decades
Yeah.
reading the Bible, studying the Bible. And it's like, we're not questioning or we're not deconstructing for a lack of belief, but using the critical thinking skills to figure out what that relationship is for us. Because like, to your point, as you did, we can sit here and quote. We can talk about the parables.
Yeah.
We can pull lessons. Like, we can do it. We read it, right? So it's not
Okay.
even a lack of knowledge. It's more of a, I'm working to deepen this experience and this relationship for me and my relationship with God.
Right. And you know, and I think that's the thing. It's like because we have that critical thinking ability, is that like we don't take everything in the Bible literally. And I think that's the biggest problem with people in the church is
Absolutely.
they literally want to take it word for word, page for page, as literal as possible. And it's just like every story can't be literal.
Mm-hmm.
Every passage, every saying can't be literal.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. And it kills me like when people like pick and choose what they take literal,
Yes.
like what they take seriously and then what they don't. Because like it's some things that people will take seriously. They'll read, oh, you go burn forever, whatever the scriptures are. But then it's like when it comes to, and I actually have been enjoying the debate around this, is like even the line of spare the rod, spoil the child, how often people use that scripture to like justify just hitting their child or to
Right.
justify physical discipline. And I appreciate all the conversations because it's like, now I'm seeing a lot more pushback where it's like, y'all are reading this and taking this literally, and you're really not supposed to.
Yes.
You really like don't
You're
have
not.
to. So I love that. I love
And
that.
that's the biggest problem with so many Black people that we see with their emotional regulations and just their anger issues that they have is because like they were just beat and there was no excuse, there was no explanation. It was just spit a rock, spoil the child, beat them
Mm-hmm.
because they acting up, they're out of line, getting back in
Absolutely.
line.
And this is gonna be a whole nother conversation, but I just love that. I love that so much because when we talk about physical discipline, I feel like people are always so quick to say, "Oh, well, I got beaten, I turned out fine." You ain't got no emotional regulation skills. The slightest thing happened, your temper is exploding. You have no idea how to communicate your emotions. You have
Okay.
no idea how to receive other people when they're telling you their emotions, how to respond to boundaries. You don't know how to respond to like how
When
to
you
set
get
your
too
own
mad,
boundaries.
you black out. You don't even remember what happened.
Don't even remember. That's not fine. That's
Yeah,
not
it's
being fine. Like that is not being okay. And I love the conversations that we're having now because I feel like we are real life proof of what it looks like to just put that work in, right?
Yeah.
Doing things differently than what our parents or grandparents did, where it's like, okay, this may have been like how y'all have done it for years, but we're not doing that, right? We're going to therapy. We're working on ourselves. We're doing the self-reflection. And we're treating others kindly. We're setting boundaries. We're respecting boundaries.
Yes.
And I love that. My views of God have changed tremendously. Growing up, my relationship with God felt very transactional. I do X, Y, and Z, I get this. If I do this, then this happens. And that took me a very long time to unpack. And it was very hard for me to unlink because I feel like a lot of what you're taught growing up, even when I think of scriptures like God gives his toughest battles to his strongest warriors, right? Like things like that, where I almost feel like in a lot of ways we romanticize struggling or we romanticize struggling or view struggling as this gift and or lesson from God. And that's something that I actually still fall into a little bit now, that I continue to be intentional about unpacking, because it'll be moments where if something bad happens or I have a bad day, I was like, this must be because I did something. And so it's really taken me quite a bit to really unpack and unlink that, which has been challenging. Because when I think about all of the invisible barriers that I feel like churches often use to keep people there, a lot of those things really take a really long time to unpack. Even with the idea that if you leave the church, then you're no longer protected, or God is no longer with you. Just like all of those that I really had to unpack. And I've really had to work to really unpack this idea that my relationship with God had to look a certain way. And it really took me until early adulthood, probably early to mid 20s, before my prayers even looked different, before my prayers felt genuine and authentic. For a very long time, they felt very scripted. I felt like I had to pray in a certain order. Like it would always start with the prayer. You start with everything that you're grateful for, and then you get into the things that you want to pray about. And it just felt very generic. And so I feel like now my relationship with God feels a lot more intimate, a lot more personalized. And I feel like my relationship with God, as I was talking about earlier, at this point feels like an extension of self, right? It feels like this deep internal knowing. It feels like this deep and intimate connection in a way that I didn't feel when I was younger. And it's taken a lot of work to get to that point. But I feel like now my relationship with God feels like being deeply connected with self, with the powers that be. It's one of those things where it's like you know something that's out there, but you can't quite put your finger on it, but you know it's someone out there vibing with you. Yes. It's kind of like that. And for me, it's not, I don't know how to describe that, because it's not a friend thing, it's not a parent thing. It's not, oh, I look to you as this all power, all knowing, but it is like this extension of self, but also like this, I can't quite put my finger on it. But I'm gonna stop there because I feel like the point is gotten across. How has your view of God changed since you were a child?
How hasn't it changed since I was a child? It probably, like, as a young child, we all kind of, like, I guess growing up Christian in America, we kind of start off with that idea of God as a man in the clouds with a big beard watching all of us and seeing the things that we know we shouldn't be doing. Then progressing into being a teenager, where I became what I have already called a true believer. I'm really kind of engaging with Christianity as like an ideological thing. God became, I guess to a certain extent, he was the same thing. It was this eye in the sky, this panopticon, this impersonal watcher and judge of all of us. But also this fascinating impersonal mind to be examined and, I guess, fearfully and respectfully questioned. I think I definitely had a much more nuanced understanding of the idea of God as a teenager. And then, following my break with the church during my late teen years, early adulthood, I'm kind of back on, it's just, it's a white man in the clouds that certain people use to maintain their own power and to enforce their own worldview on the rest of us. Like, I guess God can be as nuanced as you make him, but you have to keep in mind that you're making him. And if you're taking instruction on God from somebody else, then you have to assume that they're making him in such a way as to validate their own position over you.
I think my view of God now, especially after having taken a lot of philosophy, religion, worldview type of classes, where I have seen so much beyond just the bubbles that I grew up in terms of their thought patterns and beliefs and doctrines, I've come to realize that there's truth in all religions. So Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, literally there's intersections in all of them, spirituality, things like that. And I feel that I now look at God as being less of this rigid, very defined, narrow minded, omnipotent ruler who is waiting for the opportunity to destroy the unfaithful ones and save the ones who followed all his commands. I no longer look at God in that light, and I look at God in more of a universal perspective. I no longer, just because I find comfort in that it makes sense in identifying as a non-denominational Christian, I no longer look at God in this sense of, if people are not Christian, they are not serving God. I look at God as being a universal concept where no one really knows 100% what religion is the truest religion or the best religion to serve God, because they all have different truths within them and they all have intersections at some point. So if someone wants to serve as, a Muslim, or if someone wants to serve as a Catholic, or if someone wants to serve as a Baptist, or if someone wants to serve as maybe someone who subscribes more so to spirituality, and so on and so forth, whatever you want to serve God as, I feel that as long as you are doing that from a pure place of heart and you are being a good person and you are bettering the world, it's not my place to say, you didn't follow this scripture, you broke this law, you didn't follow this 10 commandment or whatever it is. I no longer look at God as being someone who is checking boxes to see who's following this or that. It's all about being pure of heart and having good intentions.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I feel like that for me was one of the things I genuinely struggled with in church and when deconstructing, is that I feel like growing up in the church, a lot of the language and the framing that was used growing up is, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and then if you don't, you're going to be punished in this way. Which to me, the fear mongering, especially to hear as a child, like to hear those things and to internalize those messages as a child, I was terrified to be sent to the lake of fire when I was cheating on tests in elementary school. Like, that is something that really does weigh on you. And I would fully agree. I've really had to be very intentional about moving away from that theology, because focusing specifically on that genuinely made me very angry and resistant to trusting God, because it was just this iron fist, especially in the Old Testament, genocide, killing people, wiping out populations. And yet, this is also the same God people are trying to tell me is merciful, has grace, is patient. I don't know. Very beautifully said.